welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, CRB Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We are 1 week away from, the NBA season officially kicking off. But before we do get started with this, congrats to the Las Vegas Aces for winning the WNBA Finals. They're the first WNBA team to go back-to-back in 20 years. So big shout out to all of the ladies who showed out in that, showing. It's pretty interesting. Let us know if you want to see us, do WNBA content. I think it would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, congratulations, to the Aces. I mean,
Yeah.
Asia Wilson, she balled out. She didn't win the regular season MVP, but she got the most important trophy, the championship, the finals MVP. They were down two starters as well. In terms of Chelsea Gray was out, Candace Parker had been out, but still, I mean, it was a back and forth battle. It was highly competitive, very defensive oriented. It was 70-69. The Liberty had a chance to win it at the end. With Vandersloot open in the corner, but she missed the shot, air ball, and that was that.
Right.
Brianna Stewart on the other end, 3 for 17. In that game, right? So pretty rough. But again, like he said, if you want us to talk about some WNBA basketball, we'll do it.
Yeah. And we've been covering the preseason in its entirety, whether it be games, storylines, rumors, and all that stuff. So we're gonna continue to do that because this is pretty much the last week of preseason. I know everybody's like, thank God, because I think this NBA season is going to be one for the ages.
Yep.
Once again, we appreciate all the support, whether it be our recent content, our full content, shorts, TikToks, whatever it may be. But please continue to support us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for updates.
Yeah, so I mean, we're gonna get into some more preseason action right now. So we're gonna start. I guess we'll start with a team that we hadn't talked about a whole lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Raptors, right? This was a team where we were kind of mixed on their offseason. We did like some of the pickups. We liked the shooter pickup. We liked
Right.
Brady Dick, in the draft. Um, but a guy that I think is going to be a big part of how far the Raptors can go in terms of whether or not they're like just really awful or kind of like a potential competitive play-in low playoff spot is Scotty Barnes, right? Because this was a guy who, was had a terrific rookie season, but last year kind of struggled, right? And again, with a young guy, young guys will be up and down, but so far in this preseason, he's been really good. In this last game against the Bulls, he had 22 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, 4 blocks, 2 of 3 from three. Um, and those are the main things for him, right? Is the 3 point shot, right? Can he
Right.
get that to consistently fall? Because he's good at attacking the basket. He's a good athlete. He's got a good handle, right? Decent passer, right? Again, the main thing is again that outside shot. Can he continue to grow defensively? I mean, this is a really, I think a bizarre Raptors team. I mean, the Schroeder pickup I think is intriguing just because, again, it's a different type of guy from Van Vliet. Schroeder's a pesky defensive guy. He's small, similar to him, not quite as good of an outside shooter, but still, like I think he's a guy that can really help out the Raptors. From a competitive standpoint.
Sure.
Um, they didn't start. Uh, Jakob Pertl, right? They started Boucher. Pertl was out, but again, Pertl is their big man. OG Anunoby, right? Star of the trade rumors for pretty much all of last season, right? Didn't really do a whole lot offensively. 7 points, 3 assists, a steal. 2 of 5 from the field, 0 of 2 from 3. But again, like, the Raptors are kind of a team where you do kind of wonder if they pull off something, closer to the deadline. I mean, so far, they've really done nothing in terms of trades for the most part the last couple of seasons. They've dangled a lot of guys in deals, but they just haven't really done a whole lot. So it's kind of hard to get a read on what they're really going to do. They weren't, reportedly in the Lillard sweepstakes, but then reportedly didn't offer any of their, main guys. So how into the sweepstakes really were they?
Sure.
But, again, they do have a lot of players, and maybe there's a world where they're better than I think we think they might be, but I don't know. I still feel like they're still kind of ways away from, the rest of the crop of these. I think their over under is like 36.5, right? And, I feel like there's a number of teams that could get to more than 36 wins before the Raptors. But,
Mm-hmm.
kind of talk to me what you saw in terms of the Raptors.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, the number one thing to watch here and look for is definitely Scotty Barnes. I think this is a guy that we know has all the talent and has shown, the flashes. They're clearly there. We saw it, in his rookie year. The problem is the consistency, but, this game is a pretty good step in the right direction, if you ask me. 22 points, 8 for 14, 2 for 3 from the 3-point line. So I think that's what they want to see from him. Obviously, he had some other stats as well: 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, and 4 blocks. So it's all about internal improvement. And I think I'm not gonna say their success hinges on how good he is per se, but I think depending on how good he is, I think we will see everybody around him play even better as well. I think he's one of those guys that has the potential to be somewhat of a star. I think like I said, his rookie season was really good. So to see him take that step back, I was kind of disappointed with that. And then I think the other thing to watch out for is definitely Siakam as well. Um, because I think we do have to wonder how is he going to fit into this team. I mean, yeah, he still is the number one option, but I don't think this team can go very far if he's the number one option. But that might just be me. Not a huge fan of this roster. Not a huge fan of really, a ton of things that they've done. Like you said, the only thing I really liked was Grady Dick and Schroeder. But outside of that, not expecting too much from these guys. But I do, hope and wish them success. But I don't know. I just feel like if you're gonna get Van Vliet out of there, you might as well get Siakam out of there too. I just don't really see a point in having just one of those guys. But that's kind of where I stand with it.
Yeah, like I said, I think the Siakam thing, part of it is that he wants that big super max extension, obviously,
Right.
and he's got to be an All NBA guy, which maybe he can do. It's going to be tough because the forward position is really competitive.
Right.
And then obviously if he gets traded, right, then that lowers the chance. He can't get the super max extension. He loses that eligibility. But at the same time, which teams are calling for Siakam. Like where do you think he'd be a good fit? Because Atlanta was a team that he'd been heavily tied to.
Hmm.
Um, and that one I think we feel like could be intriguing. There's ways where I think it could be, pretty good, and then there's others where, you gotta kind of have to wonder. But overall, I feel like I would be for it, just depending on who the Raptors, or excuse me, the Hawks, gave up in that deal.
Sure.
But outside of the Hawks, do you can you think of any other teams, that I mean, a lot of teams I think would want Siakam. It's just like obviously like some teams are going to say like, are just not going to do it just because of, there may be redundancy at that
Right.
position or they just don't have the asset, like,
Yeah.
could a team like say Golden State talk themselves into Siakam, but then at the same time, they would have to give up probably like, Chris Paul and then probably like, at least one of like Kaminga and Moody. Would they do that?
And I don't think they're
Maybe.
ready to break that up yet.
Right.
Um, but for me, I mean, I would kind of be interested to see if maybe they get somebody like maybe Brooklyn gets involved. I don't know. I feel like they have some assets, but that could be
Right.
a huge hot take or something.
Right.
And that's just really for the East. Like, but I feel like it would have to be somewhere in the West. That's what I'm thinking. I don't really foresee them looking to help the competition in that sense. I know it's not as much like football, but uh, I wouldn't say OKC. I don't think they have enough to. I mean, they have the picks, but I don't think they have the players, and I don't think they want to touch
I
anything.
don't think they're ready for that yet. I don't
Exactly.
think they feel like they're ready to make like that leap, in terms of like, hey, let's give up all these picks. I think they're gonna wait to do that and see what they got this season.
Yeah. But yeah, I would really just say Brooklyn maybe. It would be interesting to see if maybe Philly gets involved. Um,
Hmm.
that one might be interesting, but I doubt the Raptors
Tyrese
want Harden or yeah.
Drummond, Pete.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think, the Raptors would want Harden or and I don't think Philly wants to give up Maxi, so that's the tough part.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. That's the issue there.
Mhm.
And again, like the Raptors just seem to have this reputation of dangling a lot of guys around, but they haven't
Mhm.
actually them. And you got to be careful with that because again, if you do that too much and they just up and leave, right, then you don't have anything. Because
Right.
again, get anything back for Fred Van Vliet. He just left as a free agent, and so that could happen with some of these other guys down the road because these guys aren't going to be under those type of contracts forever. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, and then for the Bulls,
Oh god.
uh,
Might
you
be even
know,
worse.
yeah, not a whole lot, for me there. Again, I know like some Bulls fans may hate, how we talk about them, but I don't know. Like I said, I just don't really feel that great about the team. I mean,
Yeah.
again, their guard rotation. I mean, it's Kobe White, Ayo Dosunmu, Javon Carter, um, you know, Alex Caruso.
That ain't it,
So
man. That's not
yeah,
it.
I mean, Yeah, and I
for
mean,
me
and then
personally.
after that, yeah, and then after that, Levine, DeRozan, Vucevic, Patrick Williams. I mean, Torrey Craig. I mean, I like some of the defensive guys they have, but still, at the same time, I think it's going to be another rough year for them because again, without Lonzo, it's just it changes kind of the just the formation of the team because again, he's a guy where he's a big guard that defends and shoots really well. He's a solid playmaker, and the other guys, can kind of do some of those things that he can do, but they can't
Right.
do all of them together. Like say, Javon Carter can defend and shoot like Lonzo, but he's a
Right.
lot smaller. Caruso, can defend, like Lonzo, but he's not the same, caliber of shooter. And then Desunmu, and Kobe White, those guys are primarily scorers. They don't really provide the same defensively, um, in comparison to, Lonzo, and that's the tough part. So it's like, but again, that's all they can really do because he's not going to play this season. So they're gonna just kind of have to play it out, and who knows? Like I said, I keep feeling like the Bulls are a team to look out for in the sense of like they could be somebody who decides to move someone at
Hmm.
the deadline. Like, cause
Right.
I mean, I don't know. I just feel like at a certain point, there's just no real reason to keep this going because it's just not going to work. Because I mean, maybe Lonzo can finally get healthy, but that's not going to be for another year. And some of those guys are going to age out, at some point. I mean, like DeRozan is still really good, but how many more high level years do you get out of him? How
Right.
many high level years do you get out of Vucevic? And like, again, the Bulls are, this is not like a cheap roster. It's a relatively expensive team, and they haven't really gone anywhere. So
Yeah.
I don't know. We we've already spent more time about Chicago than I feel like we really should, but
Yeah.
I just
I,
yeah,
I'm
so
I agree, and I'm gonna keep it brief. Um, and I'm gonna be harsher than you. I think this team just flat out stinks. Quite frankly, I mean, like you said, there are good pieces. I think Zach Levine, great piece. DeMar DeRozan, great piece as well. But if we look at their careers, they're not necessarily in that category of championship caliber players. You know what I mean? Like, I think they have the potential to do so, but the history is there in front of us. They haven't really been on quote unquote winning teams. Like teams that have really had a shot. I guess DeRozan with the
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 Raptors, yeah.
Raptors. Yeah, the Raptors. Before Braun decided to own that franchise for eternity, but I don't know. And like the Vucevic deal, I mean, we've gone through it. You can watch our Chicago Bulls offseason breakdown if you want to hear us talk about them anymore, but I'm not a fan of this team at all.
I mean, yeah, this is not a team that I'm gonna be spending a whole lot of time on
No,
League Pass
no.
watching,
It
if
would be
I'm gonna
different if
be honest.
Lonzo was there. I can tell you that, but
Yeah, because
not too different.
that stretch where all those guys were playing, that was a really good
It
team
was
and it was
fun
a
to
fun
watch.
team. Yeah, it hasn't been the same, and again, the injuries stink.
Yeah.
That's the rough part.
Yep.
Moving on to another matchup, the Wizards and Knicks, right?
Woohoo.
So, obviously the Knicks guys, they played all their main guys, right? Brunson, Grimes, Mitchell Robinson, Randall, R.J. Barrett,
Yeah.
DiVincenzo, right? So all the main Knicks guys played. They did their thing. They ended up, losing the game though. But with the Wizards, right? Of course, new Wizards guard Jordan Poole, right? He had 41 points through three quarters. 10 of 19 from the field, 6 of 12 from three, 15 of 16 from the line. And again, this is, that's the thing about Jordan Poole, that made him, an impactful player on that Warriors title team is, he's, when he gets hot, right? He's a very, potent offensive player. And again, this was in three quarters. He was on a heater. And, again, like I said, the title year, he had a lot of games like that. Obviously it didn't work out last year with the Warriors, but um, again, we've talked about it before. We expect big things from Jordan Poole this season, right? Even if the Wizards don't necessarily win, a ton of games, right? I expect that he will, have a more return to form year this year because again, now he's on a team where he's going to be one of the go-to guys. There's no more pressure. He's got his money. He's got a title. So all he's really got to worry about is just basically hooping.
Yeah. You're not wrong. And obviously this is my team. If there's any new viewers here, this is my legit squad. It's the team that I root for. But I like the sense of urgency, fire that we're playing with. Albeit it is preseason, we're 3-0 in the preseason. I know everybody take that with a grain of salt, but nonetheless, I think there's something to be said about the chemistry that I think we're seeing, especially between Tyus Jones, Jordan Poole. I know Kuz didn't play in this game, but with him on the court, I think that'll be interesting. I am concerned about maybe the volume of shots. It's It's a lot of threes. But they were hitting the threes at a very good rate. Around 44% as a team. There were some other guys that went off, like Mike Muscala, of course. But sticking with Jordan Poole, I kind of want to ask you this question because I know you weren't necessarily too high on what the Warriors pulled off in this offseason. So, jumping the gun a little bit, do you think the Warriors messed up big time with this? Because I think, this is something that's going to hurt them, because I think, when Steph Curry maybe he wasn't having the best night, Clay wasn't having the best night, Jordan Poole could sometimes be there to pick up, the slack. So without him and bringing in Chris Paul, somebody who's kind of, I'm not going to say polar opposite, but a little bit different than Jordan Poole, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess from the Warriors' perspective, I guess the thought process is, Poole may be the more explosive player. And you can argue who's better at this point, but I
Hmm.
think what they probably feel like is that Chris Paul is obviously the more steady player. And the problem with the Warriors last year is, they were kind of the complete opposite of stability. It was kind of a mess, even though, I thought that they could, kind of overcome that and get, come out of the Western Conference.
Right.
It just wasn't enough, right? Again, they had from start to finish kind of just a mess of a season, right? Poole, right, and Draymond, obviously they got into it. Um, in addition to that, I think they came into the season not in the best of shape. Obviously Wiggins missed a ton of time. Gary Payton didn't come in until late. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, again, we're gonna have to see, what the Warriors do this season. If they don't win a title, in the next couple of years, and yeah, they may look to regret it. But I think part of it is also just financial because of the new CBA. Because Poole's on that big long-term deal, right? 5 years, 130 or whatever million it is,
Hmm.
right? A lot of money. For a guy that is primarily a scorer, but still, that is something where there's going to be those random nights where, yeah, nobody can score, but he's got it going. And then you can just give the ball to him. But last year it just didn't work out. So I
Hmm.
guess the question, how much of last year do you feel like was sort of just like an aberration in the sense of he just had a bad year. It happens to
Right.
everybody. Versus like is last year closer to who he is, and we're about to find out. I mean, I feel like we will see a better version this year,
Hmm.
but at the same time, like, would you get this version of him if he was still with the Warriors? I don't know. The relationship may have been too fractured by that point.
Sure.
But again, like, that's kind of how it goes. With a lot of these young guys, on teams that are trying to contend, is that sometimes they may just not be ready, and it's weird because he certainly looked the part and was ready for it the year they won the title, but it just backfired last year. So,
Yeah.
um, I don't
And
know. I mean, long term. I think it depends on if the Warriors win the title. Because if they win the title, they're not going to regret it. But if they don't win another title, then they might. Because again, by the time that Chris Paul's out, Poole will still have maybe a decade or so more left in the league. So
yeah, and my thing is like I don't know. I've been thinking about it kind of frequently and often now that Poole is a part of our about a part of the Wizards, obviously. Um, was it more so that maybe Jordan Poole necessarily didn't have like the most down year? I think we've seen more drastic decreases in terms
right.
of
The
stats and
playoffs where it
falling
was
off.
like
Yeah, the playoffs were
just
horrible. We knew that. But like my thing is maybe it was more so the Warriors themselves had a bad year, and I don't know. To me it seems like they may have scapegoated it a little bit because I'm doing like digging a little bit. Like in the regular season he looked pretty good, if you ask me. 20 points per game, which is pretty good, and majority of
I
it
think
coming off the bench. But I know that there were some situations where he did have to start. He did start 43 out of 82 games, so
yeah,
I do
I
get it.
think I think the way that I look at it, I guess for him is that like last year, I think the main thing was the drop in the efficiency. Is kind of what hurt him because again, he is a score first player. Again, he's not the only guy. Like I know people pick on him for his defense, and he is a horrible defender. But there's a lot of guards in the league where like if their shot's not falling, they're gonna look horrible because they're gonna get scored on a lot, at
Right.
will.
Yeah.
And they're not gonna be hitting their shots. But I think that was the main issue for him in the regular season. And then, there were a couple of games I think where there were times where he would look guys off, and kind of go for his own shot. Like I think there was that Memphis regular season game
Yeah.
where he went for like a deep shot towards the end of the game and then stepped through the mouthpiece,
Yep.
and got
I know what
lost.
you're talking about.
Although Poole ended up winning the game for them, I think on a cut to the basket, where he got a layup. But um, I think that was the main thing. I feel like with the punch, I just think the relationship
Hmm.
had probably just set its course, and I think it had gotten to a point where we talked about it, where it was probably going to be either Poole or Draymond that was going to be gone. and you knew they were going to choose Draymond because that's the guy that was with them for 4 titles and has a stronger, tighter relationship with the core guys as opposed to Poole, who was there for one. And you can't keep everybody. If once everybody's on a big contract, somebody's going to have to go. Like they're going to have to make other decisions eventually down the line, right? Like say like let's say Kaminga balls out, right? Maybe he balls out, and then he has to get paid, within the next year or so, right? Like then you're still going to be paying 5 guys a lot of money. He may make a lot of money too if he plays really well. So, again, that's kind of the decision for them down the line is now they have an aging core, so they kind of have to figure some stuff out.
Right. Yeah.
And we'll look at that as we get into the Warriors preseason game, but still,
Yeah.
um, but and then from the Knicks perspective, I mean, yeah, defensively wasn't great. I feel like the Knicks, we talked about it. We liked the DiVincenzo pickup. The rest of the roster is pretty much the same. So it kind of comes down to RJ Barrett, right? How much does he progress? Does he
Yeah.
continue to get better? Considering he's still really young, right? Brunson, we know he's really good. Randall obviously can be kind of a wild card where regular season wise, his production's pretty solid, but playoffs, obviously, there's usually a dip. Although in fairness, he was hurt last postseason, but I don't know because again, like the Knicks, I mean, I don't see a reason for them to be really any worse than last year. Because
Right.
again, they picked up DiVincenzo, who I think will be a solid addition. But how much better are they? I still feel like they're still a piece or so away, from being like a real serious contender. But either way, I feel like with the Knicks again, I don't think they're ready for that just yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I think right now they still kind of have to continue to establish that new culture that Brunson kind of helped, create.
Yeah. They're a tough team to gauge. I think. I think number one, I'm not gonna say like that they'd be better off without Randall, but I think they can be better. If they bring in somebody else, I think they just need one more piece. And I'm not saying like a superstar or anything like that, but more of an impact player. Like yeah, DiVincenzo is really good, but I, I don't know. They just need one more person, like maybe like a low tier star, or just like I said, an impact player that night in, night out, you know what you're getting from them. Because I think the issue with this team isn't their work ethic or anything like that. It's just consistency. Because you got two guys on the team that aren't the most consistent guys and haven't been for the majority of their careers. Like Julius Randle was very hit or miss in the playoffs, and R.J. Barrett was too at times. So and Jalen Brunson pretty much put the team on their back or on his back. So I am curious to see what this New York team does. I think they'll probably be in a similar spot. As they were last year, where they're in the playoffs. I'm not going to say contending for the chip, but they'll be a playoff team. I think as long as they have Brunson, R.J. Barrett, and Julius Randle on this team. But I think they have what it take. They can have what it takes if they get a different um, addition to the squad to get them over the
Right.
hump. That's how I feel.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's kind of how I look at it. Because outside of that, I feel like the team is probably going to be in a similar spot to where they were last season,
Hmm.
where get the right matchup, they can win a playoff series. Probably can't get much past the second round just because I just feel like there's a cap on that how good they can be.
I agree.
Um, Moving on into the next one, right? Rocket Spurs, right? So, more Spurs, Wembanyama, Magic, right? Of course, obviously the crazy dribble move, nutmegging his defender, crazy pass into the corner. Shot didn't go in, but still,
Hmm.
3 for 10 from the field. So obviously shooting wise, not great, but still 15.6 rebounds, 2 blocks, 7 of 8 from the line. Um, they also, going back from the Heat game, right? It seems like they've kind of debuted a new starting lineup where it seems like, Jeremy Sohan is going to be the point guard of the starting unit, and that's going
Yeah.
to push Trey Jones to the bench, which I think is kind of an intriguing move. It makes the Spurs a lot bigger. Obviously, for sure, right? He's much bigger than Trey Jones. And I feel like also like because Sohan, they probably feel like he's a starting caliber guy, or at least right now, they probably want to get him a lot of minutes. And it just, it also kind of takes some more pressure off of because you have another big guy. You
Right.
don't have as many little guys that you can just, kind of like hunt in a mismatch. Right? Because now Devin Vassell is basically their smallest guy. Um, so I mean, again, not like a natural point guard, right? Because he's not like a great ball handler, or a crazy passer or anything. But he does have a lot of size, for that position. So how do you feel, about like the move towards Sohan being the point guard, point Sohan? How do you feel about it?
I mean, I'm not gonna say I hate it, but I don't necessarily love it. I'm a Trey Jones fan. Um, I think I'm not gonna say like Trey Jones is like a starting caliber guy because I mean like last year he had decent averages, but to be fair, that team was horrible. You know, one of the worst in the league. So I get the the strategy to move on, but at the same time, I don't know how many games they're gonna win. But at the same time, um, their goal probably isn't to win games. You know,
Right.
so
Yeah.
looking at him, I think he does have a good unique skill set, especially for his size. Um, so maybe it could be like a poor man's Ben Simmons kind of situation that we could be looking at, where he's a taller guy, um, not one of the best outside shooters, but he can hit the shot obviously, and then he can facilitate pass, rebound, of course. He's just tall, so it is interesting that they're loading up. Um, in terms of size, but I think it'll be interesting to see the volume of shots that are coming to each of these guys in the starting lineup. Like I think we're probably going to be seeing Wembenyama, Keldon Johnson, and Vassell probably getting most of the shots. So I
Yeah.
think that's their
Devin
strategy.
Yeah, Devin Vassell, he's had a really good preseason. He had 25, 5 of
Yeah.
10 from three, 8 of 14 from the field. He's been really good finishing around the basket, which was kind of one of his, weaknesses, I guess, offensively. And
Hmm.
again, he just got paid, right? I think he's, kind of a core key guy on this team. I think he's a
Yeah.
really good player. If he can continue, to progress and get better, that's only going to help the Spurs, right? Because I think right now, weakness of the group is the lack of perimeter shooting.
I agree.
Um, and so again, if he can continue to progress as an offensive player, because he can already do a lot of other things really well, that'll help them in the long run. But the point Zohan thing, I am really curious about it because
Hmm.
again, I remember when he, first came in the league, right? He was mainly looked at as like a big, like a
Power
forward.
forward.
Yeah, exactly. Not really as like a guard, but I guess, if they're gonna morph him into like a Ben Simmons, Draymond-esque type player, that's kind of intriguing. But like you said, the goal for them isn't necessarily to win games. I'm just looking at it from the perspective of like the practicality of it. Maybe it
Right.
might just be again, protect Victor, from like from himself in the sense of like now you got a bigger lineup, so you can't necessarily just take advantage of everybody
Right.
out there. You got another rebounder in there. Um, and then again, like, just he's also a guy that, that can be kind of like a chaotic player, not in a bad way, but just,
Yeah.
a guy that can
He makes it
just
hard
make
for
things
defend or for both on both sides of the floor. Sorry.
right, exactly. Yeah, it can be kind of tough to game plan, for that. So he can be a wild card, in that respect, in a good way, I think. So,
Yeah. Because
brings a
there's
lot of
times
energy.
where he can like hit the three, and then all of a sudden he'll be rising up over you, or rising up over defenders. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
So yeah, exactly. And then we already talked about Houston. They didn't play, their main guys. This was a game where it was mostly their young guys like Thompson,
Yeah.
Whitmore, Şengün, Jabari Smith, Jay Sean Tate. Obviously, we hadn't mentioned it, because it happened after the last time we recorded, right? But Kevin Porter Jr. now he's been moved off the team,
Right. I
right?
forgot about that.
He was traded to Oklahoma City for Oladipo. Who was the other player?
I think it was only Oladipo, but it was multiple second round picks. I think.
Yeah, but like, yeah, so he was traded, and like you said, it was for a couple of second round picks. We'll see what they do with Oladipo, but we talked about it where like now obviously there's minutes, a lot more minutes available at that guard spot, and Thompson, this can kind of be his time to shine. Um, in that role where he's kind of came in like as a point guard. Now he can kind of be the main backup point guard off the bench, and I think it makes this lineup, this rotation a lot easier to work with. It was Jeremiah Robinson Earl.
Yeah,
That's who it
I
was.
just googled it. I was about to say once you were done.
Yeah, so obviously we know what happened there, right?
Yeah.
Obviously he had those allegations of course. So, now he's been moved to Oklahoma City and Oklahoma City is going to waive him. The contract, the first year of that contract is guaranteed, the remaining years are not. So, now he will be, out of the league essentially. So,
Yeah. Crazy situation. You guys can read up on it. We're not gonna really delve into it.
yeah, but just in regards to the Rockets now, like I said, I think this now opens up spots for some of these other guys. And it'll be interesting to see, because again, with Udoka, coaching the Rockets, right? I think there's going to be, more of a strict culture, kind of established in Houston that wasn't there, in years prior. We're now like, hey, there's not a whole lot of guys on this roster where they're just going to be guaranteed to get minutes, because like
Right.
even Whitmore, right? Like he had kind of been towards the end of the rotation in a lot of these games. Obviously, he started tonight, didn't shoot very well, but still had like 6 steals and a block, 4 for
Yeah.
15, but still, so again, like Houston, record wise, are they going to be great? Probably not. But I do think at the very least we'll see like a better process going on over there. Because again, I think a lot of their young guys have gotten better. I think we can see it. We've seen it since summer league. We've seen it in preseason. And I think that will continue with guys like Jabari Smith Jr. Um, and now they have some other veterans in here. Again, it's kind of intriguing, right? Dylan Brooks and Fred VanVleet are your main veterans, but again, Van Vliet at least, does have a lot of credentials in terms of he's been highly regarded as a really good locker room guy. So, um, it'll be interesting. Again, it should be a really fun team to watch, because again, a lot of exciting young talent. Again, like I said, probably not going to win a whole lot of games, but they're going to try to be competitive because they don't have their first.
Hmm.
So again, so are there any other Rockets guys that you think might be able to kind of like sneak their way into the rotation that may not have been in there before, or
Mm.
is it pretty much like just Thompson and that's it, and everybody else is probably just on the outside looking in?
I mean, I'm thinking it's really just Thompson, and that's it. Because I mean, like, it's not
Veteran,
that these guys are like bad per se. It's just like,
right?
I mean, starting caliber players. I mean, the roster is really front loaded in terms of young talent. I mean, you got Jabari Smith Jr., obviously Jalen Green, and then Whitmore has been playing pretty decent. Sengun, we already know what he is, although he did get shut down by Wemby, and we know that he's not a great defender. Jay Tate. So there are guys on this squad, I think, that are good, but at the same time, starting wise and like getting minutes, I think they're gonna be scarce because I think Udoka is probably gonna have the guys that he's set with and the guys that he likes, and the situations that they're gonna be in the game, and I think that's just what it comes down to. And in terms of a competitive team, you don't really see competitive teams shake it up too much until the playoffs. So I think they're gonna try and and they want to be competitive, like you said. They don't have their picks, so they have no choice. They don't gain anything from being bad. If anything, they should go all out and see how far they get in the competitive West. But being competitive, I think we're probably gonna see the rotation be trimmed down a little bit. And I think
Yeah,
another interesting thing about preseason is there's like still cuts to be made by these teams,
right.
So that's another thing that we do have to take into account. Some of these guys may not be on the team, by the time the season starts in like a week.
Yeah, I think that's another good point as well. Because again, like you said, there's a number of guys on these rosters where, like, even as we speak, right, there have been guys, over the last several days, right, that have gotten waived,
Hmm.
or removed from a lot of these rosters. Because
Right.
again, like you said, all these teams tend to have more than 15 guys, right? Some of these teams may have up to 20 guys, and they got to cut all of them, before opening night. So, but either way, you never know because some of these guys may have a standout preseason stretch, and then maybe they'll play their way onto a team.
Right.
So,
Or they get signed to like a two-way. Who knows? But
exactly.
it
Yeah.
should be interesting to see what Houston does because they are front loaded in terms of young talent. I just don't know how much of that young talent is going to translate into winning because I think Jabari Smith Jr., I think he's going to have a great season. I think Jalen Green can have a good season. It all depends on how focused and locked in he is. And then obviously the rookies, I think, will do well, and Sengun will do well. Um, and obviously with bringing in a coach like Udoka, I think that's also something to to focus on as well. So I think Houston will be interesting and a fun team to watch, like you said.
Yeah. And then moving on, to another preseason battle, right? This one, kind of had a semi-playoff, atmosphere to it, right? And that was Kings Warriors, right? Which was, of course, a matchup in last year's playoffs, right?
Hmm.
Kind of one of the biggest matchups, or most entertaining, in the entire postseason. Obviously this one, the Warriors won 116-115 with Steph Curry hitting a game-winning three. Um, but this one, was kind of intriguing, right? Some of the Warriors guys were out. Obviously, Draymond's been out. We don't know if he'll be back for opening night. But Chris Paul, they moved to the bench this game. And in his place, right, they started Jonathan Kaminga and Trace Jackson Davis, which was a rookie, that we were very high on, coming out of the draft.
Yeah.
And he had a solid game, 13.7 rebounds. Did have 5 fouls, right? But still, made his presence felt. Jonathan Kaminga, right, who's had a really strong preseason, right? He had 18 points. Um, 6 rebounds, a steal, 5 turnovers, but still 2 of 5 from 3, 7 of 14, looks a lot more comfortable. Wiggins played. Chris Paul off the bench had 13, 9, and 6. Klay Thompson really struggled, 2 for 10, 1 of 4 from 3. Saric, right, 6 of 10 from the field, 1 of 5 from 3. Bricked a couple of free throws that would have won them the game, but it didn't matter because Golden State ended up winning. Um, so, the Warriors, they've been undefeated in the preseason, thus far. So, again, like obviously Draymond hasn't played, and that kind of changes, what it'll kind of look like. But
Sure.
um, you know, are you digging this team more now, or like, are you kind of like more so in the perspective of it's preseason, I don't want to get too high on it. Or can you kind of see the Chris Paul thing, hey, I can see where it makes a lot more sense now.
Well,
Because in fairness, this was the first time where he came off the bench.
Well, here's the thing. I think the Chris Paul thing is destined for greatness. I think it's gonna work. At this point, I think I've seen enough to say, okay, yeah, it's basically just like having another Draymond out there. Somebody who can, be the relay guy, get Curry the ball in smart, efficient ways. My only concern with this team at this point is literally Klay Thompson. Um, I've already expressed I don't think he's gonna go back to the Klay that we all know and love. I think he's pretty much plateaued at this point, and he may just be one of those hit or miss guys now, and that's the unfortunate reality. So that's really my only gripe with this team. But as for the Chris Paul thing, love it to death, honestly. It's really magical to watch, like to see them pass between each other, and then Curry's wide open off an off ball. It's really just basketball poetry, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, again, even for somebody like me who wasn't as high on it,
Hmm.
the other part, for me was I was never concerned about the offense because I felt like the offense was going to be fine either
Hmm.
way because I think Chris Paul knows, what to do in terms of how to play with all these guys because he's a smart player. You
Hmm.
know, the main question I would have is the defense. Um, but again, if guys like Kaminga, right, if he can be like a legitimate rotational guy where, he's playing every night and not just every once in a while, that can obviously, make a huge difference, right? And he's young. So, he should, in theory, continue to get better. Obviously, Draymond coming back, right? Obviously we know, he'll help them defensively. It'll be intriguing to see how they, work those minutes between him and Draymond or, Draymond and Chris Paul. Moody, obviously, he's another factor as well. So, and I think again the other aspect that we don't always talk about is again they kind of got embarrassed in the playoffs last year, and from start to finish it was just kind of an unserious season, and you've already seen like from the beginning of preseason onwards they've taken this a lot more seriously,
Yeah.
they've been kind of on point. And and again, sometimes stuff like that, sometimes you got to be kicked in the mouth in order to, to kind of, do stuff like that. And that's kind of the other thing where like now that they have a chip on their shoulder, again, you never want to count the Warriors out. I think that it's going to be tough again, because the West is really tough. Um, but at the same time, again, I think that there are 4 teams that I think can kind of confidently say like we have a chance to make it out of the West, and I do think the Warriors are one of those 4 teams. Primarily, I think because of Steph, because
Oh yeah.
again,
Yeah.
that's the main thing here. Because again, like with Clay, yeah, if he's hit or miss, I think that's going to make it a lot tougher, right? Because without Jordan Poole, you kind of need Clay Thompson. You need his scoring to be pretty consistent. You've lost, an explosive guy in the backcourt. But again, it is preseason, so we'll have to continue to see how this goes. But I think offensively, right, it's clear that like it looks pretty solid. I think you know what
Yeah.
I mean. I think
I
it
agree.
looks really. I think it makes sense because again, like you have a bunch of high IQ guys that know how to play. And it's like what we talked about with the Wizards, where with Poole, again, he's more explosive, but Paul may just be he's the more steady guy, right? He's been, in a lot of these situations, the point guard position, that's something he's more natural at, obviously, than Jordan Poole.
Hmm.
Uh, and so just, down the stretch of games, right, you can comfortably say, like, hey, Chris Paul, run a pick and roll for us, run a play like you said where you can get Steph the ball, when he's running off the screens.
Right.
Or maybe he can set an off ball screen for somebody, right? So, offensively is not really the issue. You know what I mean? Like and
Hmm.
again, like there are things that he does that they don't do as much on offense, right? So, the Warriors don't run as much pick and roll. Aside from like, Steph and Draymond will do it sometimes, but it's still like a lot of dribble handoffs, a lot of
Yeah.
motion offense, off ball screens, and he can do that for you as well. So,
Yeah.
I'm very curious to see like, is he actually going to be a part of the second unit? Because he came off the bench, still played 29 minutes. And that's where I think it's going to be really intriguing because those second unit guys, if he's, playing with them, they'll look better. I
Oh
think
yeah,
like
for
a guy
sure.
like a Kaminga will kind of feast, off of, Chris Paul's playmaking, or, Saric can get wide open looks, or, Gary Payton can get cuts to the basket. So there's a lot to like offensively. I think it just depends on the matchup, right? Because,
Yeah.
if they run into, a team like the Lakers, I think that's going to be tough, because we saw last postseason, right? The size and athleticism was a little bit too much. But, there are other teams where I think they could match up well. I think they could match up against a team like a Phoenix. Denver, I don't know. I know that they beat Denver a couple years ago, but that was with, Denver's main guys other than Jokic not really playing. I know the concept in the sense of like, Steph can pull Jokic away from the basket, but, I don't know what that looks like against a fully loaded Nuggets team. But I do think the Warriors have a chance. Like I said, I don't care for the trade as much, but I still think because of Steph, you still got a chance. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it. And like I think the great thing about the Warriors is they can shoot their way out of their
Yeah,
problems, you know?
right.
But also the bad thing is you can't shoot your way out of every problem, you know? Like
Yeah,
you said, size, you can't shoot your way out of size, I don't think. Um, but you can shoot your way out of a bad defensive night for sure. Things like
yeah,
that. It's interesting to see like, how it's going to work. And I think with Chris Paul, I think it's the beautiful thing about that is it can work either way, you know? There could be some nights where he starts and it works great. There could be some nights where he's coming off the bench and it works great. Like I think
yeah.
it's primed to work either way. Um,
Right, because yeah,
so yeah.
and like you said, and matchup wise, again, like when they played against the Lakers, in their preseason game, he looked awful. Like he just looked out of place. He looked a little too slow,
Mm-hmm.
right, size wise. He just looked like he just was not. He just didn't look like he didn't belong.
Right.
But against a team like the Kings, that's a team they can play with, all day. I mean, obviously, it was a very competitive series, but at the end of the day, right, you just trust the Warriors guys more just because they've been there before. Obviously, the Kings, have that first round experience now, but
Mm-hmm.
obviously we can get into them. But they
Yeah.
had a big lead on the Warriors late in the game, and the starters played most of the game, but of course, they couldn't get stops, down the stretch of the game, and that's the Achilles heel for the Kings, right? Where their offense is really good, and it's going to win them a lot of games, but it's an offensive first team, has a ceiling, right? And as good as their offense is, say like a team like a Phoenix, their offense has a higher ceiling in the playoffs than the Kings because Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, that's just a better group of offensive talent than
Sure.
say what the Kings have, right? Like the Kings can still score a lot, but again, come playoff time, right? Like we saw, right? They didn't look quite as dominant, right? They ended up losing in the first round to the Warriors. It was still a competitive series, and to their
Absolutely.
credit, nobody thought it was going to really be that competitive of a series, and
Right.
they made it one. But again, the issue for the Kings is still, I feel like defensively, they still haven't made a whole lot of improvements, if any. The Chris Duarte pickup, fine, he didn't really play. JaVale McGee as the backup big man. I mean, okay. I mean, I don't hate it, but at the same time, age wise, he's getting up there. He's 35, so how much realistically is he going to do? And again, is he the answer for the Kings defense? No.
Doubt it. No.
Um, so I mean, that's kind of the thing going on there for the Kings. Their new guy that they brought in, Sasha Vezenkov, right? So far he hasn't really, done a whole lot. Obviously it's preseason, so again, you
Right.
have to wait and see. But I don't know. The Kings, I feel like for the regular season, I know, we're not as high on their playoff success. I mean, but they could still win a lot of games. You know what I mean? Like that's but again, like are we expecting them to do a whole lot better than last year? Probably not, right? Like
Right.
record-wise, it could be somewhat similar, maybe slightly worse. But playoff-wise, it's probably going to be the same, right? Like if they're probably going to go out in the first round unless they match up against, some team that they, that just has no answers for them on offense.
Right.
Which again, I think most of the top teams they're not going to have an issue with Sacramento.
Yeah. We're known, and apparently, people have gotten on us about sleeping on the Kings, but I'm gonna continue to sleep. I mean, like, they're good, but the problem is the West got so much better. I think that pushes them down a couple notches for me. And, in terms of their playoff run, it was kind of interesting. Like,
Right.
I feel like if they played somebody other than the Warriors, like, I don't know, we may have been talking a little bit different about them. Because I feel like they could have gotten away with beating like the Clippers per se, but I don't want to jump the gun on that. And I don't really want to deal with hypotheticals. But looking at their box score, it is interesting. I feel like they do have weapons, but
Yeah.
I think the problem with them is, like you said, defense, and then the other problem is depth. Because once you get past a certain amount of guys, you're just like, okay, now what do we do? What can we go to if even these guys at the bottom aren't really panning out? That would be my only knock on them outside of the
Right.
defense.
Because yeah, and that's the thing. Like De'Aaron Fox, right? He's young, so he can still continue to get better. He had a great
Right.
season last year. Keegan Murray, right? He's still
Hmm.
young, so he can obviously get better, and he's been really good. I think in preseason, summer league, right?
Yeah, I
All that.
agree.
Yeah, but at the same time, right? Barnes, how many great years does he still have left? And even his at his best, right? He's still not like the most ideal in the postseason to have, right?
Right.
Sabonis, he didn't play that well against the Warriors. And I know he had that hand injury, but still, I feel like there's going to be certain matchups where he's just not going to play as well, compared to others, right? And he didn't play well against Golden State. Um, Maybe it'll be better this time, again, if he's healthier, but still, Malik Monk, right, obviously as a scorer off the bench. Kevin Herter, right, we'll see. I mean, again, a lot of these guys were really good in the regular season, but their games just kind of fell off a cliff come postseason, right?
I
Herter
think they
was
got
great.
tired, really.
Yeah, Herter was great for the Kings in the regular season, and then he was kind of invisible against the Warriors, primarily on, offense, right? I know defensively there were times where he played decent defense, but
Hmm.
that's the issue for the Kings is like I think some of the schemes that they tried to attempt were, reasonable, but they don't have the personnel. Like, say like if you're the Lakers, you have Anthony Davis. So it's like there are certain schemes, or types of players that you can have out there defensively or get away with on defense, because you have AD. But when
Yeah.
you have Sabonis, you just can't do that.
Yeah, he's not a
So,
defender. FYI. Like,
yeah, exactly. So I mean, and again, like with Murray, right, and Barnes, right, like I think Murray is fine, but and Barnes is okay, but still, like long term, right, you probably would like to have somebody else in that other forward spot.
right.
Where it's like maybe a guy that's more like a natural. I mean, Murray's rebounding, and fine as and defending fine as a four, but you might like to have somebody that's a little bit more like physical, at that four spot. And Barnes is a decent athlete, but still, but obviously like regular season, it's gonna be fine. I think their offense is going to be able to win them a lot of games in the regular season, and then come playoff time, depending on the matchup, it's probably going to be a rough outing. It'll be competitive, but still,
Yeah. I'm in the
unless they
same boat as you.
unless they pull off some type of swing move at the deadline. Like let's say they're like a random Siakam team, you
Okay.
know,
That
then
would pique
obviously,
my interest. Now would be
yeah,
talking a little bit differently about the Kings, depending on what they
right,
give up, though.
yeah, exactly. Depending on what they give up, but something like that, right?
Right.
Like they can manage to swing another big impact guy. That obviously would change my opinion on them long term. But for now, I feel pretty similar to how I felt about them last year, where you know they did surprise me. They earned a lot of my respect, but I
Yeah.
still don't feel like come playoff time they're going to be that significant.
Yeah. I'll continue to sleep on them.
Yeah. So, um, yeah. So that pretty much for preseason, yeah, that's the main stuff we have to talk about. There's other games that continue to go on, but again, the regular season is getting closer and closer. Right, we're basically less than a week away.
Yes, sir.
Obviously, yeah, it's gonna be crazy, to see, opening night. Obviously, you got the Lakers and Nuggets, and then you got the Suns Warriors as the second
Yeah.
game. I mean, there's gonna be a lot, I think, to look forward to in those games, right? Of course, with the Nuggets, they have their ring night. They get to, bask in, their championship glory, right? That they earned over the course of last season, right?
Hmm.
The Lakers, obviously, they had to beat the Lakers in order to get there. Um, I guess, obviously, we don't have to spend too much time on it, but,
Sure.
what kind of things are you looking forward to in terms of like, what are you expecting and hoping to see, out of, those couple of games? We'll start with the Lakers Nuggets one.
Well, I want to see these teams fight tooth and nail for every point. I think at this point, we know that there's beef here. Malone, he constantly had the Lakers, pretty much in his mouth, pause. But he was talking, reckless. And then, with the Lakers, they feel some type of way about that, rightfully so. So, I want to see that AD, Jokic matchup. I want to see Braun, going 100% on opening night. And then I want to see Jamal Murray and Jokic, go off as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing, like I said, them fighting tooth and nail for each bucket. I want to see a lot of defense. I want to see great offense as well, though. And I just want to see both of these teams acting like it's the postseason, pretty much, because I think that's what the fans deserve, and I think they owe it to each other to show each other, that they are the top dogs in the West, pretty much. Because I think now we know the Lakers have gotten better. Um, it's pretty much the same team from last year, but they did add some guys, I think, more impact players, so they did get better. And I think they'll be a top 3 seed. But with Denver, they didn't do much, but I don't think they needed to. So it should be interesting to see how these two teams, shape out against each other.
Yeah. I think, again, I think one of the most, I don't know if I would call it interesting. I think one guy that I'm kind of intrigued in terms of like, looking to see how he plays on opening night, I think would be D'Angelo Russell, right? Because obviously he was a guy, in that series, right, who went from, being kind of up and down, but, for the most part being more of a positive than a negative, right, to
Mm-hmm.
being a negative in that Nuggets series, right, where, he was getting targeted defensively and obviously offensively, his shot was no longer falling. And he's talked, a lot about like, hey, yeah, they were targeting me a whole lot defensively, so I've been, trying to correct that. He's been pretty engaged on that end in the preseason. Again, it is preseason, so how much stock do you take into it? But I think that's another thing that I'm kind of looking at because again, like, even in the playoffs, right? We remember, right? Because Michael Malone, he had talked about, like, yeah, one of our goals was to take D'Angelo Russell out of the game. And, now it's gotten to a point where, like, are they going to continue playing him, right? Like, which you don't normally hear, but,
Right,
that
especially in
was
the
real,
playoffs. Oh my God.
right. And that was a real part of the series. And, now obviously he's, coming off a situation in the offseason, right? Where, his name was in a lot of rumors and then he ended up re signing, but on a contract that was a lot less, a lot lower than he probably would have liked. Because even us, when we projected, how much he was going to get, like, that was on, that was a lot lower than I think, we expected.
Yeah,
I think you
that
thought
was
he
a
was going to
steal.
get more than what I thought, but neither of us thought he was going to get much less than like 25 or 22 or something like that. You know what I
Right.
mean? But he ended up getting like 18.
Yeah.
So, I think he's got a lot, to say on opening night, and then or in terms of looking at it, right? Just from the perspective of like, what are you going to do? Because again, this is a team that played you off the floor. And again, maybe he's just unplayable, but it is something to look forward to. And then obviously with the Nuggets, like you mentioned, their main guys, right? Obviously, they're gonna, like you said, they're gonna obviously look to probably, play really well and kind of, make a message to the Lakers, right? Like, yeah, we beat you last year, and we still, we're gonna beat you again. So it'll be really intriguing to look forward to. And then Suns Warriors, right? Obviously, those are two teams that are going to be in each other's way, right? Going into the the season, right? Obviously, with the Warriors and the Suns, right? Durant, he used to play for Golden State, and since he left, right, they ended up winning a title without him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it'll be really intriguing to see like if those two teams end up getting to play against one another because I think that's a team and a collection of teams, right, that I think match up against each other really well.
Yeah, I agree.
Like I said, because again, like with the Warriors, they have the 3-point shooting, combined with the defense. But then with the Suns, their offense, is could be potentially even more overwhelming just because of the different ways they can hurt you. Um, but at the same time, again, I think both teams, have things that they can kind of pick at each other with. But, at the same time, right, I don't think there's no negative beef towards the teams other than, the fact that obviously Booker and Clay, went at it a lot
The
last year.
only
So I'm
thing.
curious to see how that continues, right? Because there was a time, right, where Clay Thompson was much better than Devin Booker, or at the very least more impactful, right? And, obviously now that's flipped where now Booker, is the guy that's looked at as, the man, in that sense.
Right.
So, I think that's going to be really fascinating to look at. And obviously, we'll get into a deeper discussion probably in the later episodes, right, as we get closer to opening night. But it's
Yeah,
just kind of
easily.
stuff to look forward to.
Yeah, and like my opinion on the Suns Warriors, I'm curious to see how many ways can the Suns hurt the NBA, because it's like now they've got the third option guy, and Bradley Beal has never really been that third option. So I'm curious to see how he's gonna fare against guys where when he was on the Wizards at one point, he was averaging 30 something points, as the
Right.
first option while being guarded by, probably the opposing team's best defender. So what can he do while being guarded by the team's maybe third best defender consistently? That's going to be interesting to see, how well they can, dismantle some of the teams in the NBA. Like we said, our concern with them is defense. We'll see how that pans out. And then for the Warriors, like you said, I think they just need to come out firing on all cylinders and hope for the best in terms of Clay's performance. But I think everyone else will be up there in terms of their numbers
Yeah,
and their stats. I think it'll be really entertaining. It's going to be
yeah.
explosive. They're bringing out pretty much all the fireworks for opening
Yeah.
night.
'Cause like I said, I continue to say I do think the Warriors will have a chip on their shoulder just
Hmm.
because of the went out last year. And those are prideful guys, right? Again, I know the Suns went out bad last year, right? But that core hasn't accomplished anything yet necessarily, whereas the
Hmm.
Warriors, they have. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot to look forward to. Opening night as well as the rest of the season, because like you said, this is going to be one for the ages. I think.
Hmm.
Um, so now we're going to continue to get into the rumors and news around the league. So obviously more Harden stuff. Um, you
Great.
know, we thought he was going to play nice. Shocker, shocker, right? Probably not. He hasn't shown up to practice. So that's kind of new, I suppose.
Yeah.
Um, but there's reports about, he was away also due to personal matters. We don't know obviously, but still he was out before that. Um, there's also reports of the idea of like, you know, it's only the beginning, right? Even though again, like we thought that that there was kind of a sense that maybe he might play nice, but who knows? Because
Yeah.
again,
Sounds like we
um,
were wrong.
yeah, well, again, there was a podcast I was listening to, and I think it was Bill Simmons. He called James Harden like one of the all-time saboteurs in professional sports, maybe one
Not
of the
wrong.
greatest we've ever seen. Just because again, he's forced his way out of a number of situations, um,
And
and
gets what he
again, like
wants every time, which is crazy.
right, and we talked about it with the Clippers, where it seems like they're unwilling to include Terrence Mann, right, in those conversations, right? Because obviously we know, defensively, right, he brings some stuff to the table. Obviously it is James Harden, right? We kind of talked about whether or not the Clippers, you know, should do it or not. I mean, we both felt like they should try to hold on to him. I mean, I feel like at a certain point, like if it's not going to go anywhere, maybe you sacrifice him. But at the same time, I don't know how you'd feel about it, just because again then what guards are you going to have that are, going to go out there and defend?
Right.
Um, but at the same time with the Clippers, like you're already in it pretty deep. So it's like, what else do you really have to lose at this point, right? Because you already don't have a lot of picks. I know they have some, but at a certain point, you're going to have to make a decision. Um, and then obviously that kind of ties into Philly, right? Because what does Philly get back, right? There's kind of suggestions that they would probably try to flip Terrence Mann for something. So maybe they could combine, some picks that they get back with Terrence Mann. But I mean, what are you gonna do? How is that gonna get you back, a star player? Like,
I
I
don't,
don't know.
I don't think so.
Yeah, because that's the issue is that, if I'm another team, why would I give up another star, for Harden? Because again, it's a guy who's trying to force his way out. He's in the last year of his deal. If it doesn't pan out, he's gone. Um, and like, yeah, there's a chance that it pans out, but still, like, I just think it's a huge gamble. Like, if I'm
Hmm.
another team, like, I'm not giving up a lot for Harden. You know what I mean?
I get
Like,
you.
we've talked about it
And
already.
Harden's prone to leave. That's the
Right.
problem. Like, he's a guy. I'm not gonna say wears out his welcome, but he more so just doesn't want to be there long term. Clearly, I don't know. It's such a weird and unfortunate situation. Could have easily been avoided, I think, too. That's the crazy part. And it would have been nice to have seen us or to seen, the whole Philly team just be a little bit more in contention. Would have been nice to have seen them build around Harden and Embiid a little bit more than they did, per se. But now that Harden wants out, there's no real going back. So I think that era is done, and it was very short lived.
Yeah, because that's the tough part for me is that I can't include Philly in the real contender conversations with this cloud hanging over their head. And depending on what they get back, if they don't get another star back, I mean, their window could potentially be closed, and that's
Right.
the rough part, right? Because they had a chance to beat Boston last year. They had a real chance. Because they had that game 6 where they were up double digits, I think, going into the fourth. Blew it all, right? Tatum had a crazy game 6 and fourth quarter performance. And then game seven, right, was just kind of an atrocity, right? It
Yeah.
was competitive first half, and then in the second half, everybody just quit. And like I said, with that Harden situation, I can't put Philly in that team of contenders because I don't think a team that has a guy that's not showing up to practices that doesn't even want to be there. You can't have that team be a contender. I don't see it. Even if he comes back and plays, how much is he really going to be into it? Like, I mean, I don't
Right.
know. I don't see.
Yeah, I think the damage is done, and that's unfortunate stuff. But I don't think this is the last we'll probably hear from him. As the rumor suggested, I think more and more is going to come out. I know there's another report that he was in Houston too, so that he
Yeah,
wasn't even like in the Philadelphia area or
right,
traveling with the team or attending practices or anything. He was in Houston, so I don't know what the heck is going on. But it's unfortunate to see. Like, and the funny thing is, for me, I'm low key rooting for him in this situation, just based on the fact that I feel like he got completely screwed over by the Philadelphia organization. If the dealings are true, with the backdoor handshake deal or whatever that they said, we're gonna take care of you if you take a pay cut. Okay, yeah. If that's really the truth, if that's really what happened, then rightful. I think his antics are rightful, and I think he has the right to do that in this situation, as long as it doesn't hurt necessarily your teammates.
right. Because
That's
I
my
think
that's my point on
yeah,
it.
because
So
I feel like the way to go about it is I don't have a problem with the team. I don't have a problem with the players. It's the front office. Like,
hmm
even if regardless of whether it is or isn't true, that's probably just the best way to play it out. Because,
right,
again, if you're taking it out on the team, then it's like,
it's not going to sit
that's
well
not
because the NBA is a brotherhood at the end of the day. I think
right.
everybody knows that.
Yeah. So, Rockets rumors, right? So they got, some potential guys that they might be interested in, right? Malcolm Brogdon, Alec Burks, Taylor Horton Tucker. Of course, we just talked about earlier in the episode, right? Because of the Kevin Porter Jr. trade, the Rockets got back, the Oladipo contract. Again, they haven't waived him, right? But they have his contract, so we'll see. They still have some players to cut, I think. But again, with Houston looking to be a competitive roster, right? It kind of makes sense to kind of explore, you know, picking up somebody. With Oladipo, he's got that injury, so he's not going to be playing right now. Um, of those three names, which one do you feel like makes the most sense for Houston? Because when I look at it, like they have a lot of guards, so I don't feel like Brogdon makes a whole lot of sense, and I feel like Portland would probably prefer to flip him to another team.
hmm
Although maybe they keep him as a backup guard. I have no clue. Um, but then and like also like I don't see how Oladipo is gonna get you Brogdon because I feel like you'd have to add additional stuff to make that work. And they have other contracts they could probably just throw in there. But so to me, it's really kind of between Alec Burks or Taylor Horton Tucker.
Yeah,
So, I mean, I guess of those two, which one do you feel like the Rockets should go after, or maybe they shouldn't go after either of them in your opinion?
yeah. Well, it's like I think they should go after one, but I think they do have to weigh, what they'd be getting with each of them. With Alec Burks, you're getting, certified veteran. We know what he can do. He's a shooter, all that stuff. Horton Tucker, I feel like, you're getting a I don't even know what you would classify him as because I've seen him play, wing, but then I've also seen him play guard, so I don't really know necessarily what he is, but I feel like he's more of a talented wild card, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah,
but I feel like that kind of fits their personality a little bit because they already have, a couple of those guys, and then adding another one wouldn't hurt. But at the end of the day, do they really need that either of those guys? I don't know, but
yeah,
I would
in
probably go
my
with Burks just for more veteran experience.
yeah, because with THT, he's more of a guy who needs the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Not a great outside shooter, right? He's
Right.
got the physical gifts where he's got the long arms, he's got the big body,
Right.
right? A pretty good attacker, but he can't really shoot that well. And like I said, he needs the ball, so that's probably a little bit harder to fit, in there when you already have some other guys who need the ball
Mm-hmm.
as well. But at the same time, he is younger, so like you said, because of the wild card factor, his ceiling could potentially be higher.
Exactly.
I think he's in the last year of his deal, right? So obviously, in a contract year, right, he could potentially be a guy, that looks the ball out,
Right.
so that way he can
You're
get
not
like another.
wrong.
Yeah, so like maybe you take that gamble. I don't know what Utah would be, like would they ask for a pick as well? I don't know. So I guess if it had to be between those two, I mean, again, I guess if you're looking to compete and win games, maybe you'd go for Alec Burks. Just because, like you said, the veteran aspect. But again, there's there's nothing wrong necessarily with going with like the wild card gamble player as well because they have some other veterans as well. So it's not like if he doesn't pan out, like you're kind of screwed because you don't have other options because they have
Right.
other guys. Like they picked
Yeah.
up Reggie Bullock, guys like Aaron Holiday. Obviously, Brooks is a veteran as well, so they have other options. So I don't know. Like I said, I honestly would say go for the gamble. See if you can get THT, but I don't know if Utah is going to do that. So I
Right.
don't
Yeah.
because
What would Utah be wanting for him?
right, yeah, because again, Oladipo, and THT, I think their contracts are pretty similar. THT makes a little bit more, but I think they're probably close enough where like if you had to add an extra thing, it'd have to be like it would just be like salary filler.
Right.
And pick wise, I mean, I feel like Utah would be like getting rid of THT. So like, I mean, so I feel like at the same time, THT is probably the better, more impactful guy right now than an injured Oladipo who wouldn't be playing.
Yeah.
So it would probably have to be, Houston who'd have to give up a pick, but maybe
Yeah.
like a second.
But
It wouldn't
but
be
do
a
they
first.
even? I don't even know if they would want to give up a pick, considering that they don't
Right.
even have their first rounder. I think
Yeah,
next year, like you
exactly.
said.
Yeah, and they just gave up a couple for the Kevin Porter.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
no, I'm back, right? Or did they give him up?
I think they got. I think they got two back,
Okay.
or I don't know.
I think they gave Oklahoma City the picks. I think Oklahoma City
You're
was the one
right.
that
You're
got
right. You're right. OKC got two.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
because that was the reasoning behind trying to trade him
Yeah.
was that hey if you take on this guy and waive him we'll give you picks
Right. That's what it was.
so,
You're absolutely right.
right so I mean
So Houston's in a quagmire with these picks, man. I don't know.
yeah
If they're asking for a pick, I'd say don't do it. Just go with the roster you got because I think it's good. Could be better, obviously, but you're working on your young star talent, so I wouldn't be too worried about THT or Alec Burks. I don't think you need those. Those aren't make or break players. You know what I mean? No disrespect.
yeah exactly yeah it's just another young guy
Mm-hmm.
to add to the roster that again if he pans out it can make you better if he doesn't it's the last year of his deal so you don't have to bring him back.
Yeah.
NBA considering East-West All-Star format. So Adam Silver, he talked about, the league might go back to that. Because obviously in the last couple of years, right, they've had the captains, right, just pick their guys. But which one do you prefer? Do you prefer,
Hmm.
kind of the captains, just picking guys regardless of conference, or would you prefer it be like, you have an East captain and a West captain, and then they just, or I guess you just have East West again, right, where you don't pick your guys, they
Yeah.
just play on teams,
I mean that
and
would
then
be
you just
tough. Because
okay.
like my thing is like, and I'm sure you can attest to this too. I mean, you and I both grew up, and a lot of people grew up with the the normal old format. So
Right,
I think when the change happened, people were like, "Boo!" This stinks, or whatever. But a lot of people
right.
like us, I think we were more on the side of if it's innovative, we're good with it.
Yeah.
Because I think change is good, and I think that was a good change. But it would be interesting to see them bring that back, just for old time's sake, I guess. But um, I'm kind of neutral on it because I like both. But the inner kid in me is like, bring back the old format. Like I miss that. But then the me right now is like, okay. I mean, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day.
I mean, yeah, because again, I guess I don't know, because I feel like what they were saying was like the NBA and the NBPA agreed in recent months to have talks about increased competitiveness in the All Star game as part of the new
Mm.
collective bargaining agreement. So that could be what it is, where it's like they want the All Star game to be competitive because it had been kind of rough in terms of the competition for a while, right? It got to a point where it was kind of a joke. And then when they changed the format, right, to where the fourth quarter is just to a specific score, then it got better. But, even last year, there were a lot of people that had complaints. I think we still liked it, but,
Yeah.
a lot of people have complained about, the All Star game lack of competitiveness, which is understandable. But at the same time, how hard are these guys going to go in an All Star game where it's like, hey, if you go too hard, you can get hurt. Who wants to get hurt, in a relatively meaningless All Star game? But we'll see. Like you said, we've seen both formats. I don't really have a problem with the draft one. I know like some people have concerns about like, oh, like some people, will get drafted last and, it might hurt somebody's feelings, which I understand. But,
Even then, I mean,
again,
come on, man. They're grown men. I don't think their feelings are really gonna get hurt. But I do understand what you're saying.
Yeah, so like I said, I'm cool with either one. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Yeah, so um then moving on, we have a really bizarre story, right? One that I wasn't really, aware of at all until it was reported. So Shams Karania, he talked about so Terry Stotts, right, who is an assistant coach or was an assistant coach for Milwaukee, right? Used to coach Portland, used to coach Dame in Portland.
Okay.
He left and he wasn't fired. He actually resigned. He stepped down as a Bucks assistant.
Okay.
And according to the reports, there was a shoot around incident going on where basically, after, a practice, I guess, the players were in a huddle, um, and Terry Stotts was talking to, Giannis and Lillard. He was having a conversation with them or getting ready to, and the coach, Adrian Griffin, he called for Stotts to join, the coaching huddle. And then when he asked, for more time, to continue to talk to the players, he yelled at Stotts, and told him like, no, come over to the meeting. And that was in front of the whole team. So then, apparently that's kind of like, I guess sort of like an interaction that kind of highlighted the issues, going on with that pairing, I guess.
Right.
And I guess like the perspective is the idea of like, Stotts was a former head coach, right? Who was a fine head coach. Um, and I guess like, I guess he probably felt like, the level of respect he was getting, like, was just not up to standards of like,
Right.
what a former coach would normally get, right? Because like it's one thing if it's like, an assistant head coach who's never really, been a part of anything before, right? But when you're talking about a guy who's already been a head coach for a while, I guess that's where the issue stem from. And, now he's gone. So, um, it's going to be intriguing, right? Because again, we talked about it, where, Budenholzer, he was fired. Obviously, we know that there was some rough stuff going on in the playoffs with the Bucks last year. Giannis was hurt, so that obviously has to be the first order of operations to be discussed. But at the same time, with them firing Budenholzer, obviously that makes you feel like okay, like the Giannis injury is a reason, but also like the Bucks still had a chance to win the series. It was still a winnable series with some poor decisions that were made down the stretch. And now they got a rookie head coach in Adrian Griffin. Again, I don't know, what he's going to be able to do for the Bucks this upcoming season. So I guess they felt like they needed a new face. But what a way to start off, being a head coach, right? With a
Yeah.
guy resigning. So we'll see how this goes. And it could be nothing, it could be something, but what do you think about this? Because
Not a
again,
good
this was one,
start.
yeah, this was one that I didn't find out about until a couple hours before we started to record.
Yeah,
I
I
was like,
mean,
whoa,
like
I heard
it's so
anything about
weird. It's so weird because, like you said, in the NBA, you don't hear a lot of stories about disrespect. Especially within your own organization. Like you hear it, like where like post game, somebody's talking like, okay, yeah, he disrespected me with like that taunt or that technical foul. Okay, cool. But you don't really hear issues of respect within the organization. So that's the puzzling thing to me. Like I said, not a good start. I don't think anything will come of it. Maybe from Dame, like being his former coach, but I feel like they may be able to iron it out, salvage the situation, whatever. But from what you just told me and the viewers, obviously, I'm kind of perplexed and puzzled. I mean, why did he have to yell at him like that? I mean, and honestly, if I'm on the team, I would probably be sticking up for the guy who's trying to talk to the team because I think a player's coach is valued a little bit more than say a coach who's just there to you know collect a check or whatever the case may be. So it's a little confusing and concerning to me, but
but in fairness,
I'm sure they'll figure
this
it
is
out.
yeah, but this in fairness, this is Giannis's guy. This is the coach that he wanted them to hire.
Sure.
So and he has been a guy whose name had been tied to a number of potential coaching positions
Yeah.
before. So he's got to be so I feel like he's a guy that has a solid coaching acumen. We're
Sure.
just gonna have to see
And
because
I
again,
wasn't even
he's
questioning that. I'm just questioning why
right.
he was trying to break up the conversation. That's my question.
Right. Yeah, and that's going to be something to look at because again, the two teams in the East, that most people feel like are the cream of the crop in the East, right? The Bucks and the Celtics, they're both buoyed by relatively young and experienced coaches, right?
Hmm.
Obviously Griffin's a former player, right? Missoula was like a college basketball player, if I'm not
Hmm.
mistaken, right? But again, both of these guys are, Missoula's going to be in his second year, but he's what 34, 35.
Yeah, he played at West
Griffin
Virginia, I
Griffin's
think.
yeah, Griffin was a former NBA player, but he's a rookie head coach, right? And again, putting a rookie head coach, in the position of, captaining a championship caliber basketball team. That's a tough job.
Yeah,
So
being
we'll
in the
see if he's
driver's
up to the
seat.
yeah. So we'll see if he's up to the task. He's replacing a guy who had already won a title, but again, it seemed like it at a certain point it just didn't work out. So, we'll see. Because again, there are some other guys, who are relatively quote unquote inexperienced coaches, right? Even like say for the Lakers, a Darvin Ham, he's even though they made a deep playoff run, right? This is just his second year as a head coach.
Hmm.
So there's going to be other teams, that have to deal with this. But the Lakers, right? They already had their battles last year, so he's more prepared. Missoula, right? Same thing. But right with Griffin, right? This is different, right? Because again, Lillard, nobody expected Lillard to go to Milwaukee, so now you got to integrate that, right? And they've only played a couple of preseason games together, right? Middleton hasn't played at all, so we have to see, what he looks like, in terms of coming back. So it'll be really interesting, I think, to see what how Milwaukee handles, this upcoming season, right? Because again, like talent wise, they have the ability to win it all, right? I got some questions about their defense in the perimeter,
Hmm.
but there's no question that like the Dame Giannis combo that should be a devastating combo for a lot of teams. And I
Yeah.
think again, matchup wise, there's going to be some teams where they're going to do, they're going to create some massive problems. Like I think a team like Denver might really struggle against a team like Milwaukee because you got Lillard who can pull up, from 30 plus feet out,
Hmm.
and then you have Giannis who can attack downhill. And the Nuggets wouldn't really have much of an answer for that. So, but regardless, we'll see. Because again, obviously, in the NBA, unlike, say in lower levels of basketball, right? It's the players that kind of drive the success more than the coaches, but the coaches do make a difference. And how much of an upgrade is he over Budenholzer? He could be an upgrade, he could be a downgrade, he could be pretty lateral. But we don't know yet, so we'll
Yeah,
have to
we
see.
just got to
So
check it
this,
out.
yeah, but it is an interesting start. And again, it could mean something, it could mean nothing. But again, that's why the NBA is kind of always fun to look at because there's always stories, pretty much every day.
Yeah, that's why we're doing this, man, because we get to report on it, weekly. So twice a week. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, the NBA season is, you know, it's almost here, right? We got less than a week to go. And again, let us know your thoughts, in terms of our discussions, this episode, right? What are your takes on some of our thoughts on some of these teams, in terms of how they've looked in the preseason? Maybe your thoughts on the Harden fiasco, right? All of it, and again, we have that TikTok that we made. So don't
Yeah.
forget to follow that as we continue to pump out content. Obviously, continue to like, subscribe, and comment to this channel. And we appreciate all the support. And we'll see you next week.